Hi everyone, I'm Erica Ruyle. I'm with Market Strategies, and I'm here today to talk to you about the wizard behind the curtain ethnographic analysis. And what I'm going to talk to you about today is not the doing aspect of ethnography. I'm going to talk to you about what happens after you've collected all of your data. What do you do with all of that data? I've spoken before at last year's NewMR festival on how to do ethnography, and so I really want to focus on the how do we understand it, how do we make sense of everything. And so you really need to follow this road to success, and this slide's a little tongue-in-cheek. That's totally fine. You know, we're going to have fun, and hopefully these three sort of key words will tip you off to how it is that you need to do the analysis portion of an ethnography. And so you need brains, a strong heart, and courage. If you're familiar with the theme we're going for here, you know, all of these, you need all of these to be an ethnographic wizard. So you need to be able to pull a lot of different information together. It's not just a simple looking at some qualitative interviews, rereading through field notes, and being able to come up with that story at the end. There's actually quite a bit that goes into doing this ethnographic analysis. The fieldwork portion of it, that's the easy part, honestly. Now, before I launch into that, I do want to talk to you about couple things about field notes, because if you've heard me speak before, you've heard me talk about your ethnography is only as good as your field notes, and I still stand by this. And there's two types of field notes that you want to take, and the first is your reflexive field notes. So you're going to be taking field notes, and I'll show you an example of a regular field note in just a second. You know, you're recording all observations, what people do, what they say, but it's just as important for you to record your own feelings. So if you look through this particular slide, this is all about me and my feelings and what was going on that day. It was 8:30 in the morning, different time zone. I was really tired, and I was trying to hurry to get some stuff off my camera. And as I was rushing through it, I deleted 300 pictures off my camera of my personal life. So I lost baby pictures, things that were not backed up. And so that just started my day off in this sort of like, oh my God, what else is going to go wrong sort of mode. And it's really important to be able to go back to this, to be able to tell what was going on in my mind, what was happening, what was the tone that I was personally going through, so that if there was something in my field notes that didn't quite make sense or doesn't ring a bell in my memory, I can go back and go, oh yeah, I was having some issues that morning, so I was off to a slow start. That's probably why I wrote my field notes in that particular way. Likewise, your reflective field notes can be sort of your quick thoughts, quick ideas. Here's what's going on. Here's what I think. Your field notes, here's a great example. They should just be, you know, exactly what's going on. You're writing a narrative, so you want to make sure you're writing what's being said, the actions, and your field notes and reflective field notes together are going to help you with your data in your ethnography. You are going to have a lot of data, so try not to get caught up in the data whirlwind. You want to get it under control by pre-planning, which is part of the analysis process, because your analysis is going to be done during field work and it's going to be done immediately after. If you have the time, traditional academic ethnography will often have a third phase in which they give themselves time out of the field and then go back to that. Not real realistic for us in market research, but you want to start ahead of time. Because what's going to happen, data reduction is going to be one of the greatest battles you'll face. If you're doing your ethnography correct, you are going to collect a lot of data. And so at the very end, you need to put it together and triangulate your data. You're going to have your field notes, both your reflexive field notes and your actual field notes. You're also going to have to look at site context. And I have an example here. I do a lot of online research, but even offline research. So even when you go into the field, and even if you're in a bar, that gives you site context. You should have a lot of coded information. Multimedia, I like to take a lot of pictures. Pictures are a fabulous way to refresh my memory on what had happened, and they're also a really good way to insert into the ethnographic findings. You know, this is what happened, this is what it looks like. A picture says 1,000 words, and it's going to say it better than you can. You're also going to have interviews. a lot of ethnographic work has interviews that follow up with it. You watch what people do in the field, then you go and you have your interviews. And, you know, back to your field notes, and on and on. All of these things need to be put together because these are going to be your contextual findings. This is what you're going to work with for your analysis, and it comes from many different disparate sources. And so the question becomes, how then do we do fieldwork? And this is a really broad overview, and I want you to think of 3 particular things when we think of the analysis portion. And so I mentioned before brains. So you want to start ahead of time. You want to come up with a good model base to ground your theory in. I know this probably sounds really academic, and you're probably thinking, oh, theory and models, and I don't know what I'm going to do with it. And I'm going to show you that it doesn't have to be a complicated model. But if you start off with a model of understanding, it gives you a really good groundwork to continue on. Heart, you want to find your similarities and contrasts. And so this is not just about going what's similar, you know, what is going on, but both of these, your connections, your patterns, all of that work together in the analysis phase. And so you need a strong heart to work through these. And then finally is courage. So you want to see things from the native point of view. And when we say native point of view, I kind of have it in quotes. You know, it's a typical sort of ethnographic term that we go when we study people in native cultures. You know, the native can be just a consumer shopping for a printer, or, you know, somebody shopping for a smartphone. But you want to make sure that what you produce is meaningful and you keep the local. Don't get so high up to forget about what is going on and what it actually means to the people who are participating. And so when we look at models, it's really important that you have a model set early on in your work. You want to look at and have a model before you even go and do your work, do your field work. This can come from an existing theoretical framework. It can come from an expert understanding of the topic. So if you're an expert on the topic that you're studying, you can come up with a model on your own. It all depends on what it is that you're researching. And so you don't want to try to fit all ethnographic data in the same box. So you may do, you know, one ethnography one month and down the road another one. You want to start fresh. You can use the same model, but don't try to fit it in if it doesn't make sense. And so I just want to show you an example from my own work. This was from my PhD work. And this is a model that I came up with trying to understand how people experience violence when they play video games. And so it really starts with this personal view on violence, and then looking at the cultural context, the play experience, and then in particular fantasy media violence, and how all of those play into one another. It's a really simple transferal model that gets at this big picture of the function of violence as contextualized in video games. So all of those things together play to give me my model. And so just some examples of models so you can see what it is that I'm talking about. You can have a modeling framework, and this is just really kind of a loose model. So if you're studying maybe an organization, organizational process, you can look at processes that go on, how do processes handle. Knowledge, how is knowledge transferred, and time. Time plays a really important aspect. These can all combine together as well within one larger modeling framework. Some, you know, deeper models that, you know, they sound at first really academic in nature, but for example, the consensus model. And with the consensus model, this is kind of a widely accepted standardized approach to how it is that ethnographers understand things. And so the first premise is that human beings understand meanings for things. So we're looking at the symbolic nature of what things mean. So, you know, what does a smartphone mean, or what does a computer mean to somebody? What's that symbolic nature? What does it mean to them as a person? And what does it mean to them in the larger cultural context? The second premise is that the meaning of things is derived or comes from social interaction. So one of the things that we don't ever want to forget is that a lot of what people understand and look at is kind of predicated on how it is that they interact with each other. Especially with today's internet, how quickly things move, how quickly we get information. These things are going to come from social interaction from one another. And then the third premise is the interpretive process. So this is sort of the understanding how it is that you deal with the encounter. So a friend says, hey, this is an absolutely wonderful tasting cereal. You should really give it a try. And so you go out and you buy it, you try it, maybe it's as good as they say, maybe it isn't, but then you kind of contextualize that back into culture and maybe tell somebody else, hey, this is a great cereal, but maybe it needs, you know, more sugar or less sugar or more peanuts, you know. You're going to contextualize that back in. Another model that you can use is a comparative model. So it starts with the consensus model that I just talked about, which is really about symbolic interpretation and contextualization, recontextualization. And within this comparative model, you're looking at not only that, but sort of an abstract, theoretical, or innovative schema. So you're taking that consensus model, and then you're probably taking sort of the expert opinion or other understanding and laying that on top of it. And a third model, which is the transferential model, uses the consensus model, but it also tries to understand the habitus of group members. So what it's doing is it's really, really looking at understanding that how it is that emotions affect people, what is going on in that immersive environment. Ethnography should be immersive, but this really wants to get at sort of the psychoanalytics of what is happening. And so any one of these models is good. As you can tell, you don't need to have a super complex model, but models in general are a good way. And the last one is a work system design, and this model is used often for corporate anthropologists to understand, how people function together, to give suggestions to HR, or just how to make workflow go better. There are a lot of great articles about different models, and I highly suggest that if you're going into something, look one up. Get some reading under your belt, and it'll click real quickly what it is that's going on. And so I also mentioned that we want to look at patterns, connections, similarities, and contrasts. And so you've probably heard a lot about coding, QDA programs, but you really, really want to start with a strong code frame. So as you can tell, we're even backing up to sort of the brains portion, and this is how you start. And a lot of your analysis starts before you're even in the field. And so one of the things is you want to start with a strong code frame. And this is going to be sort of what it is that you're looking for, because it helps you to really hone in on the data that's useful. This is not to say you want to ignore other data, because you're going to find things you didn't think was even there. This just helps give you a little bit of a circle of, okay, this is what I need to look for. There's multiple ways to code. You can hand code. In the very, very early days when I started doing this, I did it on 3x5 note cards, and I'd paste them up all over the room, move them around. I've done it with Excel. A good QDA really helps. The question is finding one that's comfortable and really makes sense for you, because there's certain QDAs out there that it's really about the program and you learning that program before you can actually get into the coding of it. So you really need to find one that you're actually comfortable with. Negative evidence is as important as positive evidence. So, you're going to go into the field thinking this is probably what I'm going to find, or this is what I expect. And it's really important to pay attention to those things that are happening that don't go with your hypothesis, that are not going into what you thought would happen. These are really, really telling. Now, as I've said before, you're going to have a ton of data. So it's really easy to get caught up in one interesting aspect. Maybe there was a particular event or even a particular individual who did something that was really, really interesting. But even though that may be sort of like, oh, this is the climax of my research, you cannot forget to look at the big picture. You always need to take a step back and look at that big picture and make sure that all of the data that you have collected is being analyzed with the same rigor. So if you're using a QDA, don't just use the QDA for field notes, or don't just use it for interviews. Make sure everything that you have collected goes into that QDA and gets applied the same coding scheme and the same coding or rigor that you've coded with. And then finally, you want to look for those local categories of meaning. So as I said, we're looking at sort of the native in this. And so a lot of the work and the analysis that you're going to do is very much interpretation. So think of yourself as a sleuth. So think of yourself as sort of Sherlock Holmes. You're a detective and you need to figure out what's going on. But you don't want to let your emotions and your subjectivity dominate, regardless of what those findings are. So if the findings kind of go against your intuition, if your findings go against what the client expected to see, you need to just make sure, I'm a detective and I'm going to find it. And early on, those reflective field notes are going to help you push through those emotions that you're having to find what really is going on. One of the things that's really important in ethnography is you're telling a story. So this is a narrative, and it really should flow like a narrative, and you want to tell it from the native viewpoint. So you can prepare for this with history and a cultural background. So read what you can before going into the field, or try to talk to people to get an understanding, because that history and cultural background can help you find categories of local meaning. And then finally, you want to punctuate your narratives with explanations. Absolutely, at the end of the day, there are ethnographies out there that you can go and pick up, and it's just kind of one big story. And they're absolutely fascinating to read. They're wonderful sort of bedtime readings to get a feel for another culture, but in market research, in our business, we need to have some sort of explanation. We need to go back to our clients and say, here's what's going on, here's what we think is happening, and here's either, you know, how you get to A, or you help out with an understanding of the product better. But you don't ever want to lose the narrative. Even when we have those explanations, don't lose the narrative. And so don't let it dominate, because really what it is that your participants have done and have said brings that ethnographic fieldwork to life. And so one of the last things that you want to do is you want to evaluate your ethnographic fieldwork. So this can take place this can take place once the analysis is written. But once you write your analysis, you want to take a step back and go, okay, does this make a contribution? Does this have something to say? Does it have an aesthetic merit? So remember, I said you're writing a story. You're telling a narrative. And I know this may seem counterintuitive to what clients want, but really this is what ethnography is about. Is it reflexive? Have you included sort of and made sure that your own findings are present? Does it have an impact? Is it going to make an impact? And does it express a reality? And so that's really important. When you look at it, does it express the reality that the client is looking for? Does it express a reality, even if it's not exactly what the client expected? As long as it expresses a reality from the native point of view, you've done a really good job with your ethnography. And so with that, I know that's a lot to take in. It's a lot to remember. I'm just hoping that it will get you thinking. Pick up some books and start reading about it. And certainly I am open to questions. I look forward to taking questions. And so I look forward to having discussions and questions with you.